Buddhism is one of the oldest religions in the world, yet if you look closely, you'll notice something unusual. There is no God at the center of it. In Christian churches, you hear about God the Father. In Islam, Allah is the focus of every prayer. In Hinduism, countless deities fill temples and rituals. But in Buddhism, you walk into a monastery, you see statues of the Buddha, you hear chants filling the air, and still, there is no God being worshipped. This is what makes Buddhism stand apart in a way many people never realize. It is a religion without a creator, without a supreme being watching over humanity. That single fact shocks many outsiders, because how can a religion survive, let alone thrive, without God? And yet Buddhism has spread across the world, shaping millions of lives. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why Buddhists don't believe in God, and how this single belief changes everything about how they see suffering, life, death, and the universe itself. Now let's begin. The world before Buddhism. Imagine a time long before Buddhism, when the lands of India were filled with chants, rituals, and the constant sound of offerings being made to countless gods. Picture yourself in a world where every aspect of life was believed to rest in the hands of deities, whether the rains would come to feed the crops, whether sickness would vanish, or whether the soul would find peace after death. Temples rose high into the skies, priests guarded the secrets of sacrifice, and the ordinary man or woman was bound to an unshakable system that dictated where they stood in society. The spiritual climate was heavy with ritual obligation. People bowed to gods of fire, storm, fertility, and wealth, believing that each gesture, each drop of oil poured into the flames, each animal sacrificed on the altar, determined their favor with the divine. Fear and hope walked hand in hand. To live was to worship, and to worship was to seek escape from divine anger and secure blessing for the uncertain days ahead. Imagine waking up in this world. Your fate was already written by your birth. The caste system ruled with iron chains. If you were born a priest, your life would revolve around sacred texts and rituals. If you were a farmer or servant, the gods you prayed to were mediated through the voices of those above you. Society whispered to you that salvation wasn't found in personal reflection but in endless devotion, ritual purity, and obedience to a system much larger than yourself. Your destiny wasn't your own, it belonged to the gods and to the status you inherited. For those who longed for answers beyond the endless circle of birth, death, and rebirth known as samsara, the weight of tradition offered little escape. Rituals promised momentary comfort, sacrifices brought temporary relief, but deep within the human heart, a question remained unanswered: was there something beyond the gods, beyond ritual and rank? Could truth be discovered, not through fear of divine punishment, but through understanding the very nature of existence itself? This was the India Siddhartha Gautama was born into, a land overflowing with gods yet thirsty for truth, a land where destiny felt controlled by forces outside of human grasp, where to imagine a different path was almost unthinkable. And yet, it was in this very climate, dominated by ritual, caste, and devotion, that the seeds of a radical vision were about to take root, a vision that would question the very foundation of what people believed about gods, fate, and the meaning of life itself. Let's continue. The life of Siddhartha Gautama. Siddhartha Gautama was born into a world wrapped in wealth, privilege, and protection. He was a prince, surrounded by luxury, comfort, and every pleasure his father believed would shield him from the harsh realities of life. From the moment of his birth, it was foretold that Siddhartha would become either a great ruler or a great spiritual teacher, and his father, determined that his son would choose the path of worldly power, made every effort to ensure that only beauty and joy would cross his eyes. The palace walls were like golden cages, filled with music, fragrant gardens, and attendants trained to keep sorrow far away. For years, Siddhartha lived in this artificial paradise, never knowing the ordinary struggles of human existence. But destiny has a way of breaking through the strongest walls. One day, when Siddhartha ventured beyond the confines of the palace, he encountered sights that would forever shatter his illusions. First, he saw an old man, frail and bent, his body marked by time. It was Siddhartha's first realization that youth and beauty do not last forever. On another journey, he saw a man writhing in sickness, consumed by pain, helpless against disease. Then, he witnessed a funeral procession, a lifeless body being carried, mourned by grieving loved ones. Death, final and unavoidable, stood before him. These three encounters, old age, sickness, and death, crushed the carefully built walls of comfort around his mind. For the first time, he understood that no amount of wealth or power could shield anyone from the universal truths of suffering. Yet there was one more encounter that stirred hope within him. He saw a wandering ascetic, a man who had renounced worldly possessions in search of a deeper truth. Unlike the others, this man did not appear broken by life's suffering. Instead, he carried a calmness, a quiet strength, a sense of peace that seemed untouched by the storms of existence. Siddhartha's heart was moved. If such peace was possible, perhaps there was an answer to the endless cycle of pain. That night, the palace walls felt suffocating. Surrounded by riches, Siddhartha felt only emptiness. The laughter of entertainers sounded hollow, the soft silks on his skin felt meaningless, and even the love of his wife and newborn child could not silence the call that echoed in his soul. He realized that if he remained in this golden prison, he would never find what he sought. With quiet resolve, he left the palace under the cover of night, abandoning the life of a prince, the future of a king, and the bonds of luxury, to become a seeker of truth. His search was not easy. Siddhartha wandered across India, studying under great teachers, practicing severe disciplines, and even starving himself in pursuit of enlightenment. He pushed his body to extremes, believing that liberation might be found in denying the flesh. But no matter how much he suffered, peace eluded him. Finally, Siddhartha understood that neither a life of indulgence nor a life of extreme deprivation could reveal the truth. What was needed was a middle path, a way of balance between the two. One day, he sat beneath a great Bodhi tree, vowing not to rise until he had found the answer. The world around him seemed to fade as he turned inward, confronting his deepest fears, desires, and illusions. Temptations and distractions rose in his mind, but he remained still, steadfast in his search. Then, as dawn broke, a profound clarity awakened within him. He saw existence as it truly was, impermanent, interwoven, and bound by cause and effect. He realized that suffering is born not from the will of gods, but from human craving and attachment. Freedom, therefore, would not come through divine intervention, but through the transformation of the mind. In that moment, Siddhartha Gautama became the Buddha, the awakened one. His enlightenment was not a gift from above, nor a blessing bestowed by a deity. It was the fruit of his own inward journey, the discovery that truth is not something granted by gods, but something realized within. And this realization would form the foundation of Buddhism itself, a path not of worshipping a creator god, but of awakening to the reality of life, suffering, and liberation. Why Buddhists don't believe in God? From the very heart of Buddhist teaching, the question of whether God exists or not is not treated with the same urgency or centrality as it is in other world religions. When the Buddha spoke, his focus was always on the reality of suffering, its causes, and the path to liberation from it. For him, the existence of a supreme being, a cosmic creator, or an all-powerful deity was simply irrelevant to the task at hand. Imagine someone struck by a poisoned arrow. The most urgent thing is not to speculate who shot the arrow, what kind of wood it is made of, or which direction it came from. The most urgent thing is to remove the arrow and save the life. In the same way, Buddhism teaches that our lives are pierced by suffering, and the purpose of the teaching is to pull out that arrow, not to speculate endlessly about divine beings. This is why Buddhists give their attention to self-awareness, to the law of karma, and to the journey toward liberation, known as nirvana. Karma, the moral law of cause and effect, is seen as more immediately relevant to our daily lives than the worship of a distant god. If a person acts with greed, hatred, and ignorance, their actions will naturally bring suffering upon themselves. If a person cultivates generosity, compassion, and wisdom, the fruits of those actions will inevitably lead toward peace. In this view, salvation is not granted by an outside power but arises from one's own disciplined effort. Liberation is a matter of seeing reality as it truly is and letting go of attachments, not of being rescued by a divine hand. That said, Buddhist cosmology does not deny the existence of gods, known as devas. These beings are often described as dwelling in higher realms, shining with splendor and living long lives. But even they are not creators, nor are they eternal. They too are bound by karma, subject to death, rebirth, and the cycle of suffering. A deva may inspire awe, but they cannot save anyone. To depend on them is, in the Buddhist view, to misunderstand the path. The work of liberation cannot be outsourced, it must be walked by each person with mindfulness, meditation, and moral living. This perspective sets Buddhism apart from the great Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which center themselves on the recognition of one supreme God, the source of creation, law, and salvation. In those faiths, relationship with God is the highest calling, and salvation is a gift extended through divine will and grace. But in Buddhism, the highest calling is awakening, a profound inner realization achieved through one's own spiritual discipline. The Buddhist path does not ask, who made the world? It asks instead, how can I be free from suffering in this world? So then, one might ask, if Buddhism does not revolve around God, does this mean Buddhists are atheists? The answer is far more surprising than it appears. Buddhism is not easily labeled with Western categories of belief. It is not outright denial of gods, nor is it affirmation. It is a refusal to become trapped by the question. The Buddhist does not deny that gods may exist, rather, the Buddhist insists that whether they exist or not has no bearing on the urgent task of liberation. To some, this may sound like atheism. To others, it may sound like a unique kind of faith. But in truth, it is something different, a path that seeks freedom without depending on the divine, and yet without dismissing the possibility of realms beyond our own. Now let's continue. Many people, especially in the West, often carry certain assumptions about Buddhism that do not reflect its true nature. One of the most common misunderstandings is the belief that Buddhists worship the Buddha in the same way that Christians worship God or that Hindus worship the deities. In reality, this is not the case. When a Buddhist bows before a statue of the Buddha or offers incense, it is not an act of worship directed toward a god. Instead, it is an expression of respect, a reminder of the Buddha's teachings, and a way to cultivate humility and mindfulness. The Buddha himself never positioned himself as a divine being. He was a human who reached enlightenment, and his followers revere him as a teacher, not as a god to be petitioned for favors. The gestures that may appear to outsiders as worship are in fact acts of reverence, much like how a student might keep a portrait of a beloved mentor or an inspiring figure as a reminder of guidance and wisdom. Another misunderstanding is the claim that Buddhism rejects the supernatural altogether. This is also inaccurate. While Buddhism does not place emphasis on a creator god, it does not deny the existence of unseen realities. Traditional Buddhist teachings describe multiple realms of existence, cycles of rebirth, and the law of karma, which dictates how actions, whether good or harmful, shape future experiences. These ideas extend beyond the material world and suggest dimensions of reality that transcend what the human eye can see. What is important to understand, however, is that the Buddhist perspective treats these realms not as places to blindly fear or worship but as illustrations of how attachment, desire, and ignorance shape the cycle of existence. To make this clearer, imagine a doctor and a patient. The doctor's role is not to ask the patient to pray to him, nor is it to demand devotion. Instead, the doctor diagnoses the illness and provides the medicine needed for healing. In Buddhism, the Buddha is like the doctor, suffering is the illness, the teachings are the prescription, and the practice of those teachings is the medicine itself. The focus is not on pleasing a deity in the hope of reward or favor but on actively applying the teachings to overcome suffering and ignorance. Just as a patient must take the prescribed medicine to heal, a Buddhist must apply the practices of mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom in daily life to move closer to liberation. This is why it is misleading to frame Buddhism as a religion of denial or absence, whether of gods, spirituality, or mystery. Rather, it is a path designed with precision, a set of tools to address the fundamental human problem of suffering. To outsiders, the bowing, chanting, and rituals may look like worship, but at the heart of these practices lies a commitment to inner transformation, not divine appeasement. At the heart of Buddhism lies a philosophy that is not built upon the worship of a creator but upon the recognition of suffering and the human ability to transcend it. The Buddha, after years of searching, realized that the essence of life is marked by dissatisfaction, by pain, by the endless cycle of craving and disappointment. This understanding crystallized into what is known as the Four Noble Truths. First, the truth that suffering exists. It is in the birth, the decay, the loss, the frustration, the desire that never ends. Second, the truth that suffering arises from attachment, from craving things to be other than they are, from clinging to pleasures, people, or even identities that cannot last. Third, the truth that there is a way to end suffering, by letting go of craving, by freeing oneself from the chains of desire. And fourth, the truth that this release is found in the path of discipline and wisdom, known as the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is not a command handed down from above, it is a guide for living wisely. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, these are practices that cultivate a mind capable of peace and clarity. Notice the absence of a deity in this structure. There is no divine figure watching your steps, rewarding obedience, or punishing rebellion. Instead, there is only the responsibility of the self, the weight of your choices, the consequences of your actions, and the possibility of awakening through your own effort. This is why the Buddhist path can feel radically different from religions that hinge on faith in a creator. In Buddhism, the idea of God is not central to salvation, because salvation itself is not about being granted favor from a higher power, it is about realizing the true nature of reality. To believe in a creator who governs destiny would, in this framework, place the power outside of you. But the Buddha's insight places the power directly in your hands. Your karma, your intention, your mindfulness, they shape the life you live and the liberation you may attain. Now imagine a world where no higher power controls your destiny. Imagine there is no being in the sky who determines whether you rise or fall, succeed or fail. Would that terrify you, to know that no one is holding the strings, that your safety net has been removed? Or would it empower you, to know that the direction of your life, the peace of your mind, and the freedom of your spirit depend only on your own effort and understanding? This is the philosophical core of Buddhism, and perhaps its most unsettling truth to those who seek the comfort of a God. In this vision, there is no one to blame, no one to beg, no one to bargain with. There is only the quiet work of transforming the self, step by step, breath by breath, thought by thought. And it is in that work, not in divine intervention, that Buddhists place their faith. Buddhism in the modern world carries a unique presence, one that has stretched far beyond the mountains of Tibet, the monasteries of Thailand, and the temples of Japan. Today it sits in busy Western cities, in yoga studios, meditation centers, and even in quiet corners of people's homes where a cushion and a candle are enough to build a sanctuary. As the centuries turned and the teachings of the Buddha crossed oceans, they adapted to new landscapes, yet the core principle remained untouched, the understanding that no ultimate God stands at the center of the Buddhist path. In East Asia, Buddhism often flows seamlessly with local traditions. In Japan, Zen emphasizes stillness, simplicity, and the direct experience of reality without the need for divine intermediaries. A practitioner may sit in zazen, staring at a blank wall, learning to quiet the noise of the mind, not in order to commune with a god, but to recognize the nature of their own existence. In Tibet, the rituals may appear more elaborate, with colorful mandalas, chanting, and sacred dances, yet at their heart lies the same foundation, that liberation comes not from a deity granting salvation, but from the discipline of mind and the wisdom that pierces illusion. Theravada Buddhism, strongest in countries like Thailand, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar, continues to preserve the earliest teachings. The monks who walk barefoot at dawn to receive alms embody the discipline of a tradition that sees awakening as an individual responsibility. Their prayers and chants are not appeals to a god for mercy but reminders to themselves and their communities of the truths discovered by the Buddha. It is a path of diligence, not devotion to a higher being. When these practices moved westward, they found a very different soil, societies where religion had often been framed around a personal god, prayer, and worship. Yet seekers disillusioned by rigid dogmas discovered in Buddhist meditation a way of peace that required no creed, no confession, and no deity. A young professional in New York might attend a mindfulness retreat, learning to breathe and release the constant anxiety of life. A student in London may sit with a Zen group, discovering clarity in silence. For them, the appeal lies not in worship but in practice, not in doctrines of divine authority but in the experience of inner freedom. Even with this spread across cultures, the principle holds steady. Whether in the quiet halls of a monastery in Thailand, the snowy plateaus of Tibet, or a modern meditation studio in Los Angeles, Buddhists are not turning their hearts to a God above but to the truths within, the impermanence of life, the reality of suffering, and the possibility of awakening. This constancy across all sects, whether Theravada, Mahayana, Zen, or Tibetan, shows that the essence of Buddhism does not shift with geography or culture. What changes is the expression, the rituals, the aesthetics, the languages. What remains is the silence where a God might have been expected, and instead, the profound invitation to know the self and the world as they truly are. Let's continue. When you look at the religions of the world side by side, you notice something fascinating. In Christianity, for example, everything centers on salvation through God. A Christian doesn't believe that they can save themselves. Instead, they put their trust in God's mercy, believing that through faith in Christ, forgiveness comes, and eternal life is promised. It's a story of a loving father reaching down to rescue his children, a relationship where divine grace is the key to hope. In Islam, the picture is different but still focused on God. The very word, Islam, means submission, and that's exactly what a Muslim seeks to do, submit completely to the will of Allah. Life is seen as an act of obedience, worship, and surrender to the Creator who rules over all things. Every prayer, every fast, every action ties back to honoring that supreme divine authority. Hinduism opens yet another door. Here, devotion often flows toward different gods and goddesses, each representing a unique face of the divine. One person might worship Vishnu, the preserver, while another turns to Shiva, the destroyer and transformer, or Lakshmi, the bringer of prosperity. Rituals, chants, and offerings become a way to connect with these deities, hoping for blessings and, ultimately, liberation. Now, set all of this beside Buddhism, and you see something completely different. Buddhism doesn't ask you to pray to a god. It doesn't invite you to surrender your life to a supreme being or to pour your devotion into rituals for divine favor. Instead, it takes the spotlight off the heavens and places it directly on you, the human being. It asks a very different question, not, what can God do for me, but, how can I transform myself? Where Christianity waits for salvation through grace, Buddhism says, walk the path with your own 2 feet. Where Islam emphasizes surrender to God, Buddhism emphasizes awareness, mindfulness, and the discipline of the mind. Where Hinduism looks upward in devotion to gods, Buddhism looks inward, to uncover the true nature of reality. And here's the striking part, the Buddha never called himself a god, nor did he want worship. He presented himself as a teacher, someone who had discovered a way out of suffering, and who then laid that path before others. He challenged people to test his words, not to follow blindly. For him, liberation was not about waiting for divine intervention, but about awakening from within, breaking free from craving, ignorance, and the endless cycle of rebirth. That's why Buddhism stands out as so unique. While many religions lift the eyes of their followers toward the heavens, Buddhism turns them inward, toward the mind, the heart, and the possibility of nirvana. And nirvana isn't some faraway paradise promised by a god. It's the state of freedom from suffering, a release from desire, a peace that arises when you finally see reality for what it truly is. So when people ask why Buddhists don't believe in God, the answer lies here. It's not that Buddhism is against the idea of gods, it simply doesn't need them. Its entire path is built on the power of inner transformation, not divine rescue. It's about discovering that the answers to life's deepest struggles are not above us, but within us. And now, as we near the end of this journey, I want you to pause with me and reflect. For centuries, people have asked, can a religion without a god truly stand strong? Does the absence of a divine being make it weaker, or could it, in some way, make it more universal? Think carefully about this. A path that does not demand worship of a deity, but instead places the power of transformation into your own hands. Does this make Buddhism less, or does it make it capable of reaching across cultures and borders, beyond the barriers of belief, and into the core of human experience? I want you to look within yourself. Do you see Buddhism as a religion in the traditional sense, or do you see it as a philosophy, a way of living, a discipline of awakening that transcends the usual boundaries? Your perspective matters. Share it, speak it, and if something new has touched you in this journey, I ask you to write one word in the comments below, awakening. For that word captures what all seekers, no matter their path, are longing for. But let us be clear. Buddhists do not turn away from God because of denial or rebellion. They do not reject him out of arrogance. Their path does not rest on speculation about the heavens, but on the raw and unshakable reality of human suffering and the search for freedom from it. The Buddha did not say, do not believe in God. He said, look at your suffering. Look at its cause. Look at the way that frees you. This focus is not about refusing the divine, it is about liberating humanity. Hinduism opens yet another door. Here, devotion often flows toward different gods and goddesses, each representing a unique face of the divine. One person might worship Vishnu, the preserver, while another turns to Shiva, the destroyer and transformer, or Lakshmi, the bringer of prosperity. Rituals, chants, and offerings become a way to connect with these deities, hoping for blessings and, ultimately, liberation. Now, set all of this beside Buddhism, and you see something completely different. Buddhism doesn't ask you to pray to a god. It doesn't invite you to surrender your life to a supreme being or to pour your devotion into rituals for divine favor. Instead, it takes the spotlight off the heavens and places it directly on you, the human being. It asks a very different question, not, what can God do for me, but, how can I transform myself? Where Christianity waits for salvation through grace, Buddhism says, walk the path with your own 2 feet. Where Islam emphasizes surrender to God, Buddhism emphasizes awareness, mindfulness, and the discipline of the mind. Where Hinduism looks upward in devotion to gods, Buddhism looks inward, to uncover the true nature of reality. And here's the striking part, the Buddha never called himself a god, nor did he want worship. He presented himself as a teacher, someone who had discovered a way out of suffering, and who then laid that path before others. He challenged people to test his words, not to follow blindly. For him, liberation was not about waiting for divine intervention, but about awakening from within, breaking free from craving, ignorance, and the endless cycle of rebirth. That's why Buddhism stands out as so unique. While many religions lift the eyes of their followers toward the heavens, Buddhism turns them inward, toward the mind, the heart, and the possibility of nirvana. And nirvana isn't some faraway paradise promised by a god. It's the state of freedom from suffering, a release from desire, a peace that arises when you finally see reality for what it truly is. So when people ask why Buddhists don't believe in God, the answer lies here. It's not that Buddhism is against the idea of gods, it simply doesn't need them. Its entire path is built on the power of inner transformation, not divine rescue. It's about discovering that the answers to life's deepest struggles are not above us, but within us. And now, as we near the end of this journey, I want you to pause with me and reflect. For centuries, people have asked, can a religion without a god truly stand strong? Does the absence of a divine being make it weaker, or could it, in some way, make it more universal? Think carefully about this. A path that does not demand worship of a deity, but instead places the power of transformation into your own hands. Does this make Buddhism less, or does it make it capable of reaching across cultures and borders, beyond the barriers of belief, and into the core of human experience? I want you to look within yourself. Do you see Buddhism as a religion in the traditional sense, or do you see it as a philosophy, a way of living, a discipline of awakening that transcends the usual boundaries? Your perspective matters. Share it, speak it, and if something new has touched you in this journey, I ask you to write one word in the comments below, awakening. For that word captures what all seekers, no matter their path, are longing for. But let us be clear. Buddhists do not turn away from God because of denial or rebellion. They do not reject him out of arrogance. Their path does not rest on speculation about the heavens, but on the raw and unshakable reality of human suffering and the search for freedom from it. The Buddha did not say, do not believe in God. He said, look at your suffering. Look at its cause. Look at the way that frees you. This focus is not about refusing the divine, it is about liberating humanity.